Hey, good people, Dr. Lund here. After the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp trial, and a lot of the coverage and videos that have been put out about this couple, I've had a lot of requests about looking at the pathology of followers. I want to thank one of my subscribers, Just Relaxing, who submitted some questions to focus this video. And so from this point, I want to talk generically about the pathology of followers, but I think Amber gives a good example of some of the issues that I'll be mentioning about both the toxic person and basically the toxic followers. I think one thing that we all noticed, especially during the trial, was that the friends that had been supporting Amber basically had done depositions, and the videotape of those depositions were played in court. The only one really who appeared on her behalf was her sister, which is not unrealistic that even if you have a toxic person and you're related to them, family members sometimes, quite often, will support the person. But interestingly, the friends that had been in Amber's life were not present and accounted for. I think one of the most telling things in the deposition of Raquel Pennington was when she was asked if she was still friends with Amber, and her reply was, well, they weren't enemies. That's a very telling statement about a friendship on the rocks, basically. Now, before we can get into some of the pathology of followers of a toxic person, let's first talk about dealing with an individual who is toxic in a relationship, including a friendship. They can be difficult and draining, to say the least. In fact, they may challenge what you know about yourself and push you to the limits, even to the limits of doing things against your own moral values, and challenging if you will stick to your beliefs or will you cross the line for the friendship. Now, since none of us really know who the people were that were friends with Amber, such as Raquel Pennington, Io Tillett, Eve Barlow, Josh, who was Rocky's husband, Raquel's husband, for a period of time, and he kind of came on the scene. We really can only speculate about how their pathology was intertwined with Amber's pathology, being, as I could speculate, the most toxic person in the relationship, and how many of these people were probably pushed to their limits of deciding what actions to take as Amber pursued her manipulation of issues, especially from what we found out with her losing the case to Johnny Depp in the defamation trial. So as we speculate about the pathology of, in general, followers of toxic people, what we want to remember as well, too, which is really of paramount importance, is that each of us have our own template of our own pathology related to our past, our childhood, issues that we dealt with. And in many cases, templates sort of fall together Some will really enmesh with each other, and some templates are so opposite that relationships usually don't form because of the difference in how people interact related to their pathology. So the followers bring in their own issues, could be codependency, need for attention, as well as the more controlling toxic person brings in their pathology of either being narcissistic or traits of other personality disorders, and those templates have to connect in a way that a relationship forms that actually, and you have to remember that actually is beneficial to both people on a very dysfunctional level. Okay, so we know toxic people are manipulative. They want to get other people to do what they want them to do, and it's all about them. They use other people to accomplish whatever their goals happen to be, and they have no concern over what the friend's goals are. There's no equity in the relationship. And to be a follower in that relationship, you have to accept those terms. So often you see the followers are people who gladly put that toxic person first. They do just about anything to ensure that toxic person gets what they need, gets what they want, supports them, even if they're totally wrong in a situation. But there is a loyalty built, again, on inequality of who has power in the relationship and who doesn't. And clearly, the followers do not have the power in the relationship. There's also a lot of judgment from the toxic person. So criticism becomes a facet of the interaction with the followers. The criticism is about what they've done, what they didn't do. It's never about the toxic person. And of course, they'll lie if it serves them. And again, the pathology of the followers is usually accepting the criticism, feeling guilty, being gaslighted. They have to bring an insecurity to this relationship in order for these toxic strategies to be effective. Otherwise, if they had good ego strength, good self-esteem, they wouldn't tolerate a relationship like this. So when you look at the followers, you can see there is so much weakness in their ability to stand up for themselves or stand up for what is right, that they succumb to the manipulation and the judgment. Followers in these relationships learn very quickly what's going to be accepted and tolerated and what isn't. So, for example, if the follower tries at all to confront a criticism or a negative behavior from the toxic person, that person is going to vehemently defend their perspective, take no responsibility for what they've done or what they've said, and turn that around onto the follower, that pretty much will shut down any future confrontation of behavior. They learn very quickly that if they want to stay in the friendship, that this is one rule that they cannot break, or they will suffer the consequences. Now, very often, the toxic person will not apologize because they don't see any reason to. Things are always somebody else's fault. And in many of the instances, although they'll try to orchestrate relationships to serve their own ends and means, They try to gain sympathy and attention by claiming a victim status. And that's usually something that the followers will support, buy into, and continue with the facade that the toxic person is the one indeed the victim. Now, although the rules of the relationship really become quite clear, here's one issue of the toxic person that does become somewhat confusing in the relationship, in that they are inconsistent. Inconsistent in their perspective, their attitude, their behavior, depending on what they feel they need to accomplish or what they want to have happen. And you know how kind they can be when they want something from you, and how punishing they can be when they feel that you have disappointed them or have not been loyal. The toxic person will also make the follower prove themselves, in that they will make you choose them over someone else or something else to see where your loyalties lie. Often this turns into a divide and conquer dynamic, where the only choice is the toxic person, and anything else shows a disloyalty. An example of this situation was during the deposition of Raquel Pennington. When asked why she was no longer friends with Amber, her answer, interestingly, was because she wanted to spend time with other friends and other people. I think that was very telling in her statement. Another trait of the toxic person is that they make the follower defend themselves. And that's really because their focus is not on problem solving or solutions, but it's on the problem itself. And so remember, in their manipulation, their tactics may include things like being vague or arbitrary, as well as diverting the focus of the discussion to how the follower is presenting it, the words, the tone the follower is using. Now, this we definitely saw in the audios between Amber and Johnny, of how Amber was able to manipulate the conversation where it never got to a resolution, and the fight became about how they were fighting. Usually in these unequal friendships, the followers initially feel like they are with somebody who may be better than they are, that have more than they are, have more resources, even share their resources with the followers, as we saw in Amber Heard's case, where, well, they may not have directly benefited from Amber's resources, but they did from Amber's contacts, such as Johnny's resources, living free in penthouses, going to an island to party, having the benefits of the relationship, and feeling important and empowered initially. But usually in these type of relationships, the followers' importance starts to erode depending on what they can bring to that toxic person. They're looked at like a tool. If their usefulness is no longer warranted, then usually they go by the wayside because they provide nothing to the situation. So when we look at the situation, especially with the toxic person who seems to have the more dramatic strategies in a negative sense. We also have to look at the pathology of the followers who allow these things to happen and take part and consent to this relationship. So they're really not innocent bystanders of this situation, but again, they may initially receive positive benefits from the relationship up until the time where usually there is a decision that has to be made. If they follow the toxic person and continue to do so, they have to make the decision about compromising their standards, their morals, feeding into bad behaviors, even criminal behaviors. And so that's the place where it's kind of rubber meets the road of how much strength do the followers have to step back from the situation and recognize this has gotten out of control and it's not a healthy situation. So quite often, some of the traits of the followers are caretakers. They put others before themselves to the detriment of themselves. They lack confidence, have a low self-esteem, and have a very high need for belonging to a group or in a relationship. In many situations, they know they're being manipulated, yet in order to stay in the relationship because they have such a need for belonging, they tolerate situations that they really shouldn't tolerate. So folks, this is basically a general overview of the pathology of followers, especially in toxic relationships. So I thank you for being here and listening, and I ask you to please subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you get notifications for upcoming videos. And again, I thank you so much for watching.